announcements for this evening. The first one is, if you're not part of our Facebook group, please go join. Maybe Emma can throw the link up in the chat, but it's facebook.com/groups/WordPress.accessibility. And the link will be in the chat for anyone who needs that. And it's a great way to connect with people in between meetup events. And we're starting to have some really good conversations there. If you need help with something, or you're looking for feedback, or if you want to provide value to other people, we really appreciate that. So please join the Facebook group. The next announcement is, if you have not done so yet, please go take our accessibility tools survey. It's at equalizedigital.com/survey. And what this is it's totally anonymous unless at the very end you choose to enter your information, but you don't have to. It talks about how your organization approaches accessibility, what tools you use, and things like that. We are trying to get at least 200 participants. Our goal is to put together a report and do a talk on it in the springtime at a meetup event, so that we can sort of share what the current accessibility landscape looks like among website owners, particularly in WordPress. So that is there. There is the ability to enter to win a $200 Amazon gift card, in case that is motivating for you. Otherwise, please go take it, because it will be helpful to us and you'll get to see what all the results are as well. And then I did want to announce that as of last Wednesday, we started an email newsletter. We're calling it Focus State. It's going to come on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of the month. And I wanted to encourage people to join it, especially because I sent some announcements out on Meetup, which you may have gotten last Friday. And then I got feedback from somebody that said it really would have been great if there were headings in these so that I could jump around in my screen reader and get to the different sections. And I realized I had coded headings into that Meetup email, and Meetup had stripped all the H tags out when it sent the email. So especially if you need an accessible version, please consider joining the email list, because we have more control over it than we do on Meetup. And then just a quick shout out, we are looking for additional sponsors to help cover some increased costs we're anticipating with regards to our interpreters and transcripts and things like that in the new year. So please contact me if you or your organization might be interested in sponsoring, and I can give you more information. And then let's see, someone asked if the host can enable the option to save the transcript. I can try to do that. I may have to do that when I am not sharing my screen, but let me see if I can do that. To be honest, I am not 100% certain how to do that, but I will say that we do provide, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing that option in the settings panel. But we do provide a full corrected transcript with the video, usually within a week, if not sooner. So there will be a transcript available on our website. And then on that note, if you have any other suggestions, if you do know how and you want to tell me and send it to me in the chat, I can try and do that in a minute here when Phil starts talking. I'm just not certain how to do it right now. So let me, if we go the right direction, real quick, I'm going to give some information about who we are and then also our sponsors, and then I'll introduce Phil. So I'm Amber. I'm the CEO of Equalize Digital. We're a certified B Corporation that specializes in WordPress accessibility, and we have a WordPress accessibility checking tool called Accessibility Checker. And we have been organizing the meetup a little bit selfishly because we wanted to have the ability to learn from all of these great speakers that we've been having. And so I was sort of like, there's no one in my area. What can I do? So we started the meetup. So that's what made us start it. If you want to get a hold of us outside, you can find us at equalizedigital.com, or we are on Twitter a lot at Equalize Digital. And then we have two sponsors this evening. The first one is WP Engine, who many of you probably have heard of. They are a hosting company. They have their brand and then also Flywheel, and they own the local app for local development and are the owners of the Genesis themes. And they host more than, let's see, I'm looking at this, 1.5 million sites across 150 countries, 150 countries. And you can find them at wpengine.com or on Twitter at WPEngine. And then our interpretation sponsor for this evening is Leon Stafford. Leon is a developer at Static and the creator of WP2 Static. He also maintains the accessible minimalism theme for Hugo, which is a different CMS, and he's in the process of porting it over to WordPress. He asked us to thank everybody who attends this meetup because he thinks accessibility is really important, and he thinks it's amazing that people are learning about how to make things more accessible. And so that is why he is supporting our ASL interpretation, which is awesome. Emma put the links in the chat for Twitter at WPEngine and Twitter at ljs.dev. We asked if you can just send them a quick tweet saying thank you for sponsoring our meetup. I think that encourages them to want to continue to sponsor our meetup and help us to make these as accessible as possible. Some upcoming events that are important to know about. On Thursday, December 2nd, we will have Meryl Evans, who's an accessibility consultant who is deaf, and she'll be speaking about how to create accessible captioned videos for WordPress and beyond. And then on Monday, December 20th, so this same time slot in December, we will have two different accessibility engineers from VMware. One is Joyce Oshida and the other one is Chris Lane. And they will actually be doing an accessibility test of the Facet WP plugin, which is a faceted search plugin that is very popular. And they'll be providing feedback to the developer who will be on the call as well. So it'll be the opportunity for people to sort of observe how a blind user, so Joyce is blind, how she engages with the site with her screen reader, and then some of the feedback that they have. And also the plugin developer will be able to ask questions. So it hopefully will be both educational and helpful so that it can improve not just that plugin, but all the websites that use that plugin. So I am so excited now. I'm going to transition. I know you guys have heard me talk a lot and you're probably ready to hear the main event. So I'm very excited to introduce Phil Webster this evening. He is a senior WordPress plugin developer at Delicious Brains, and he works on the WP Migrate DB Pro team. Phil has a deep interest in making the web accessible for everyone. You may have heard at the beginning, we were talking about how he's been tweeting a lot about accessibility lately. And he's from Pittsburgh. He has a wife and 3 kids, and he enjoys being outdoors and all sorts of awesome stuff. He often tweets pictures of pizzas he's made that make me feel incredibly hungry. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to hand over the reins to Phil. I'm going to turn off my spotlight. If you do have any questions, I'll be paying attention to the chat, and we'll let Phil go ahead and take it away.
I am trying to share my screen here.
Is it letting you?
I don't know what it's doing. All right, I think I have to give it permission.
Okay. All right, so in just a minute, we'll get Phil's screen up and then we'll go.
All right. Hopefully it will allow me to do it now. There we go. Do we have it?
Yes.
Great. All right. So as Amber said, my name is Phil. And today we're going to be talking about building a custom plugin with an accessibility first approach. Let me put the link that I have here on that slide into chat. I am really not good at hosting on Zoom. There's the chat.
We might be able to type it in for you too, if that would be easier.
Yeah, I don't know. It keeps putting me into preferences. All right. Why?
I can find it. It's on your GitHub.
Yeah. Is that it? Do you see it now? Is that in the chat?
No, I do not see it in the chat. I'll find it if you want to get started.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So we'll get to that GitHub eventually. All right. So as we already said, what was that?
It's in the chat now.
Okay, thank you. I completely have no idea where the chat is. I just found the chat. Thank you. So if you have any questions, I think it might be good to maybe Amber can interrupt me if we get a bunch of questions at some point and stop so that we don't get too far away from wherever that question was. So as Amber said, I work at Delicious Brains and I do work on the MigrateDB Pro team. We have, in our last release, we made some fairly decent improvements to accessibility. It's pretty much 100% keyboard navigate. You can use keyboard to navigate through the entire plugin. There's definitely still work to be done, and we are working on that for sure. But it's way better than it was when I first started there. So I've been at Delicious Brains since June, and before that, as Amber said, I was at Equalize Digital, where I did some work on the accessibility checker plugin, and I also did a lot of the work on the actual Equalize Digital website itself. So 26% of the adults in the United States have some type of disability, according to the CDC. So accessibility is very important for us to work on. And one of the things that I like to think about is that we need to be building for everyone, and that accessible design can be beautiful and accessible design can work. This picture here of this big curly red access ramp is just one example of how architecture has really evolved over the last, 50 years of the ADA? Might not be that. No, I don't know how many years it's been, but over the years of the ADA, buildings now really are accepting the beauty that they can come from accessible design. And I think that we need to do that too as people who build for the web. I found this quote from the Carnegie Museums, which are here in Pittsburgh. The Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh welcome all visitors, both on-site and online, We work to assist visitors with disabilities in obtaining reasonable and appropriate accommodations and in supporting equal access to services, programs, and activities. So if you follow this, this link here, the web-accessibility.carnegiemuseums.org, what you'll find there is a really great guide for developers for developing with accessibility in mind. If you go to the GitHub link that I provided, all of these links that are in here are available there as well. All right, so let's talk about the plugin that we're going to be reviewing today. So this is not a plugin that would be good for commercial release, but this is one that would be applicable to any agency or freelance developer who brought on a client and then was going to build a custom plugin for them for specific purposes. So I know that lots of examples use plugins that are for selling books or for listing books. Well, that's what we're going to do today too, but this one actually is for real. So my mom asked me to help her with her website, and she happens to be an author. So this is a plugin that I'm working on to help her with her list her books on her website. So the books are available for sale on an external site on Amazon, and she wanted a way to be able to list all of the different books. So here's the basic layout of the site. So each book will have a title, a picture of the cover, a summary of that book, a button to be able to go buy that book, a list of details, and then a list of reviews. So as you can see, there are some issues that we will need to address in terms of accessibility here for sure, such as the icons, the slider for the reviews. I put the slider in there to just make it harder on myself on purpose, so we could talk about dealing with the slider. So the most important thing to consider is that you need to write semantic HTML. A lot of accessibility issues can be avoided just by writing good HTML. So HTML elements are the structure that happens on every page. And some of your main semantic elements are the header, nav, main, article, aside, and footer. So if we were to break down that example, this is approximately one decent interpretation of how we could do that. I didn't label every single part on there to try to make this a little easier, but we'll just go over. So the main section here is, well, in general, WordPress is going to give us main. So this first outside red square is going to be an article element, which is also going to be given to us by WordPress if we don't mess with it. And then the title will be an H1. And then the first main section over to the right, we're going to break into a section that has an H2 at the top. And then each of the other main sections below that will be other sections, and then each of those headings will also get an H2. All right. So in terms of what we're going to use on the WordPress side is we're going to use 2 custom post types, one for books, and then the other one is going to be for the reviews. And in order to make the blocks, well, for this, we're going to use ACF Pro to build the blocks and a custom carousel too. So I'm going to hop over to GitHub for a second here, and we're going to walk through the plugin just a little bit. I built this in a way that wouldn't require any build tools at all. So you could download this and install this if you want to play around with it. The only thing you would have to have is ACF Pro if you want to do it exactly the way that I have it in here. ACF Pro could be substituted with your own custom blocks if you wanted to do that, but I thought this would be faster and easier to use. So over here on GitHub, just go into the main AuthorPress file. I'm going to go kind of quick through non-accessibility related issues with the plugin. And if we have questions about some specific things, then we can probably address those at the end. So the plugin starts with a few checks to make sure the PHP version is high enough, and also to ensure that ACF Pro is installed. I'll tell you what file I'm going to go to if you want to look at the actual file. So now I'm going to go to the bootstrap.php. So one thing I would like to highlight is that I am using namespaces in this plugin, and using namespaces allows you to not have to prefix all of your functions. So this is just a short file. What this does is auto loads those namespace files, which prevents me from having to do requires. So I don't have to do a require. And a lot of plugins you see will have a real long list of required files. This avoids that, of being able to use the autoloader. And then it just loads this main class called start. And then so start is in the classes directory. So then in this file, we define our custom post types, which I have constants up here for their names. And I also rewrite the permalinks here, so you don't have to do that manually. All right, so let's look at the two custom post types. So since we are using the block editor, we have to make sure that we have show in rest set to true. And there are two other features that I have not used very much, but I really like, and those are the template argument and template lock. These are built-in features to control the block layout on the page. So what block templates are is they are a preset layout of blocks that are on the page. So this is a very simple one here. And you can see in this function, it just has one block, and that's the quote block. when you declare a block template, what you have is you have an array that has a nested array inside of it, that where you declare the name of the block, and then the second parameter are any attributes that those blocks might have. So in this case, we're adding the class name is style large to that quote block. I'll show you, I can show you that. So this is the template for the review. So here's our review post type. And you can see that the template is this just the core quote block, and that template lock is all. So what all means is that you cannot change the order or add any blocks to that template. So if we actually look at this, is what a review post type looks like. And you can see that the blue plus sign where you would typically add blocks does not function because it is disabled. So what we're preventing is the ability to add and change the content. So this is a good way to control the user's content. So all you can do is add a title, which doesn't show on the front at all. In this case, add the quote, and then who added it. And that is the only information you can add for the review. So the thought is the more we can control what the user can enter, the easier it is for us to make sure that we can keep the content accessible. All right, let's go back here. And I have a much more complicated block template for the book itself. So this is a combination of core blocks and of those custom ACF blocks. I tried to indent the code here so that it would be easy to see, like, the hierarchy. So the top is 2 columns. So we have the core columns block. And then we have those 2 columns declared with that core / column. And then the second attribute here are the attributes for that block, which is set to width of 50. And then inside of that, we have another array that has the content of that column. So this gets a little tricky with so many arrays inside of arrays, but we're essentially writing the same code that you would see on the front end. It's just we're using this array syntax to do that. And then in the second column is our first custom ACF block, which I've called AP summary. And then below that is a details block, and then finally the reviews block at the end. So I've decided to use ACF Pro to create these accessible blocks. You could also do this with core blocks, I believe. Most of it, there's probably other solutions too. This is just one approach. So what we're trying to do here is we're going to try to create blocks that stand alone in terms of content, so that that block will always be accessible. So no matter where you put it, it will work. So we're going to start with the summary here. Every one of these custom blocks start with an H2. So no matter where we put that, it will work. I can't think of a place where you could stick this block and it would break the accessibility of the page in terms of content flow. So all of the content are going to be paragraph tags, and the button at the bottom, that's not actually a button, has ambiguous text. So we need to make sure that we deal with that somehow too. So this is our code for the summary block. So we have the title, and then we have this inner blocks thing here, which is not HTML, but that is actually JSX. So this is coming over from the React side of Gutenberg. But what inner blocks is a way for us to tell the block editor that we want to have a section inside of another block that has other blocks in it. And in this case, there's this allowed blocks attribute here. And what I do there is I tell WordPress that the only block that we're going to allow is the paragraph block. So I could not stick a gallery in the middle here, or I couldn't stick an H1 in there. So the only content that you're allowed to put there is our paragraphs. It is possible that you could still break accessibility, but we're trying our hardest to prevent that. And then we follow up here with a link out to the to Amazon typically. But instead of just buy book, we're going to have buy book, and then we're adding the title of the book as screen reader text to ensure that that link itself is not an ambiguous link. There's this one extra div here in the inner blocks that I don't really like, but right now that's needed in order to function properly. It's one of the quirks of Gutenberg. If I leave that out, then it makes my buy book button disappear. So maybe that's something that I will be able to fix in the future. All right, before we move on, let me show you. So if I go back to the main AuthorPress directory and then go into blocks, so these are each of the custom blocks. So we'll go back into the summary block. So there's a little bit of extra stuff here too. I find this to be an accessibility issue, and it's one of my pet peeves, is that in Gutenberg, the links are active in the editor. So this like book link right here, where if it's on the if it's in the editor side, I've set it to not actually be a link. So you can click on the button and it won't take you to that page. Yes, and then so here you can see where the allowed blocks, and that it's set to be just core paragraph. So let's see here. So this ends up with this block here where we have a summary. So it's automatically populated with summary, but I could change that here if I want to change that to something else. And that would come over there. And then here, all I can put in, if you click here, you can see like I cannot add anything but paragraphs, which is a very nice feature. And then I can click right on here and it's not going to take me to that page, but I can add the book link over here and then that'll link up the book. And the next section we're going to talk about is these details here. Let's look at the code first.
Phil, there was one question.
Okay.
Nick said, I previously used WP scaffold block to create blocks. Do you know if there are problems with it? Also, I think one can use templates to generate blocks. Do you know of any good templates for accessibility?
I've never used WP scaffold block. There is a block plugin that or like a scaffolding plugin I have used before. I can't remember the name of it. I'll see if I can find it and we could share that later. So the issue with like a lot of those block templates are that they are just blocks. They're just for creating blocks. So if you want to create custom post types or anything in addition, it would be hard to find. It's hard to add that on to that. I know that like Josh Pollock has just come out with his plugin machine boilerplate plugin that I think is he's trying to address that issue. So like if you want to add blocks to a plugin, there will be a script to help you with that. In terms of the other part, I don't really know about good templates for accessibility. I will say that the core blocks themselves are fairly good. It's just how you use them is going to be the issue there. All right, so let's go back to the details block. And in the block, so that is this block here, where we have a bunch of icons. So when I program something like this, I'm going to program it with the screen reader in mind first. So each of these icons stands for something. So when you initially code this, instead of putting the icon there, start with the text that would make sense for the screen reader. And these icons themselves don't even necessarily portray very well what it is that I'm trying to represent here. So if we look at the actual block itself, this details block, we have number of pages, which is that little bookmark icon, the formats, which is the book icon, publication date, which is a calendar, language, that globe, and dimensions, which are the ruler. If you go to the actual Amazon book page itself, they have a very similar set of icons and details about the book. So when I see a list of items like this, whether it's in an actual list, an actual bulleted list or numbered list, I'm thinking that my semantic HTML is some form of a list. And the type of list that I think works best for this is a DL, which is not used very frequently. But a DL is a description list. So you use the DT element, which is the term And then you can have one or multiple DD elements, which is the description that goes with that term. So one of the reasons I chose that was because we have multiple formats of the book. So I think it's sensible markup to use for this. And the icons they're all SVGs, and they are inline SVGs, so they don't use an image tag, but they actually use the SVG right in the code. So I took the approach of using the ARIA specification. So I use an ARIA hidden to remove the SVG from screen readers, and then provide the terms with screen reader text. And something that I think works well for this, so I said I'm creating helpers to ensure you do this correctly. So what I mean by that is, so I'm looking at the helpers.php file, which is inside of the classes directory. So I wrote a function here that I just call it icon that takes two parameters. It has a name, which is the name of the icon, and the screen reader text. So this function will not work if I do not provide screen reader text. So basically, if the developer here, so this is developer accessibility validation, basically. If I don't provide a screen reader text, I'm just going to get an error and the plugin will no longer function. So what it does here is you pass that name in and it gets that file. And then it also requires that you have screen reader text. And then let's go back to the block and look at that in. So now I'm in the details.php. So each of these you can see is, so here's our DL. Once again, the whole block starts with an H2, but we have a DL, so that's our description list. And then we have the DT. And inside of that, we have the icon. And then this icon, as we said, is outputting both the icon itself and the screen reader text. So it's using a function like that cleans up the way that this looks. It makes it a lot easier to look at from a development standpoint. And then we have the detailed definitions. So for pages, it's just one. For the formats, we loop through and print out each one, and then the rest of them all just have one option as well. All right, let's go on here. And here's that icon function again. All right, so the tricky part, build a slider that's accessible. So one of the things I really recommend is that you do not reinvent the wheel every time you want to add a function or a new feature to a site. So there are lots and lots of sliders that are available. So what we need to do is find one to use and not start from scratch. In the GitHub page, you will find a link to an article called "How to Build a More Accessible Carousel or Slider" by Jason Webb. And in that article, you can find a whole bunch of information about different types of sliders, what a slider should have, what to look for in a good slider and how to implement that. A slider that I've always think works well with WordPress is called Slick Slider. It has jQuery as a requirement. So since WordPress already has that, it is a good one to use. And there's actually a fork of Slick Slider that's called Accessible Slick that makes it even better. So let's take a look at the code for that. So our slider is in the blocks directory, and it is in reviews. So actually, let's go back to classes where I register the blocks. So this class does all the handles registering the ACF blocks. So that is here where we do reviews. So we're just adding all the attributes for the block here. One of the things that I like about ACF blocks is the ability for it to enqueue assets. So in this reviews assets function down here, this is where I'm adding all of the files for Accessible Slick. So this uses the WP unqueue style and WP unqueue script functions that you typically would see. And I have put the Slick. I downloaded and installed the Slick files in a vendor directory here in the plugin. If you wanted to use build tools, you could use npm to install this instead of having to manually do that. But I did it manually so that it would be easier for everyone to use the plugin if they wanted to. So we're unqueuing the scripts. And then let's go back to the block itself. And in the reviews block, sorry, we got the PHP file. In reviews PHP, I'm once again creating a block that will be accessible no matter where we put it. So it starts with an H2, it's wrapped in a section. And then we're creating the slider here. So the slider, once again, consists of one block, and that block is a quote block. So we're putting the quote here, which is just the content of that post, which, since it's a post type. And then I'm adding this little additional screen reader text here, where it's reviews of, and these two %S, they get filled with the current review number and the total reviews. So on the front end, this will say in screen reader text, review 1 of 3. And then if you move to the next slide, it will then say review 2 of 3. So a screen reader user would have the context of which slide from the carousel they were on. And then let's look at the JavaScript for this. So here's where we're kicking it off down here. This is just using a regular jQuery function here. So this is called initialize block. And then up here you can see we just call a function Slick on it. But the thing that is interesting about Slick Slider is that it's pretty easy for you to change a lot of settings on there. So one thing to note is that the accessible slick has autoplay off by default. So there is no autoplay on this slider. One of the things that you need to provide for a slider is the ability to pause it or stop the motion if you have that if that's on by default. So we don't have to deal with that because this is paused by default. So the only way to change the slider is with the navigation that's there. So you can navigate with the dots at the bottom. So you can navigate with these dots, or you can navigate with the arrow buttons. And you can see we also have the ability to highlight those with the keyboard and navigate with the keyboard too. So you want to be, for navigating that, you want to be able to navigate with a tab button between those different controls. In terms of what these controls need to be, these need to be buttons. So this might not be the best idea, but let's see if I can make it bigger. So there is a button here, and you can with a class of slick next. So that this button is what controls the slider. And you can see I've added screen reader text here that says next review. And Slick took care of this for us, but they used ARIA hidden to hide that icon from screen readers. So if we look at the code, we can see how easy. All right, it wasn't necessarily that easy to hack this, but the next arrow and the previous arrow, I had to put all of this HTML in there just so I could change this. So it would say next review and previous review. They don't have a way of declaring just the screen reader text. The screen reader text does exist by default, but it is really generic. So I've updated it so that it would be clear that this was for navigating the reviews. And this little thing here at the bottom is a way to load this JavaScript on the backside of the website too. So you can see the slider in the editor itself. So here, if we add a review, you can see that the review shows up. And then if I add another one, the slider shows up. So that, I think that makes a little bit better editing experience for the user. All right, so that's about all I have for my presentation itself. I think it would be great if we have questions to go and have a discussion that way so that I can actually answer people's questions they have instead of guessing.
Well, thank you so much, Phil. That was really awesome. Hopefully I'm here. Yep, I am. I checked my other computer.
Gotcha.
Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about building plugins and accessibility? Feel free to just unmute, or if you want to raise your hand or put something in the chat, whatever works best for you. I will say, I'll maybe get started, Phil. I'm curious to know, as far as from a developer standpoint, what have you found to be the most helpful as far as learning what you need to do to make code accessible, or the output of code accessible?
Well, the unfair answer is that writing tests for a plugin that checks for accessibility makes you understand the output of what you need a lot. Really, I would say that it's mostly just making sure you have good HTML. So good HTML is going to fix a lot of problems. The second thing that fixes a lot of problems is figuring out when you have to break HTML. So in my day job, I'm writing in React probably at least 50% of the time. So anytime that anything that is seen by a user, it's in React. So it's not, I know that React gets a bad rap for being inaccessible, but React in reality is just outputting HTML for the most part. We do have ways of interacting with it. React and any HTML allows us to, the Chrome and the browsers are very forgiving, so they'll make broken HTML work. I've seen lots of buttons that are really links, and I've seen lots of links that are really buttons, but to a sighted user, they work fine. Just knowing what the role of the elements that you're trying to put on the page, what they do, is using them for the right thing is the most important thing, I believe. Forms can be really difficult.
Yeah.
To deal with. I mean, one of the good things about most front-end code is that we can just use a plugin that is going to give us an accessible form. It's when we start to create our own forms or creating interactive elements where it starts to become tricky. But still there, it's like just properly formatted HTML, having labels it's going to help you, like, give you a good start. You're going to get a lot of the way there by just having good HTML.
Yeah. So Nick asked, what are some considerations you have for developers who are blind?
I would say I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know like what the tools that are in place. Is Nick's question about in terms of like the admin of WordPress or using a code editor? I don't know what particular direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have had some people, I'm not sure if Alex is still here and if Alex is a developer, but we have had some participants in our Facebook group who are developers and, I got a clarification, but I'll finish, but also are blind. So that might be a good question for the Facebook group, because they might have suggestions on like which text editor works better, those sorts of things, right? So Nick's clarification was, what considerations do you have for the back end of WordPress and the output there for, maybe it's not necessarily just developers, but more like users or people who are building the plugin or building the block, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's basically the same answer, because the back end of WordPress is really still a front end application. It's you have to log in to get there. I do think that there is not nearly as much attention put there by at least third-party plugin developers. I know that like the block editor itself has seen improvements. I can honestly say that I have not tried to use it with a screen reader. I've used it with keyboard only to see how that works, and I feel like it works fairly well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like we've gotten some feedback on things that we've built with ACF, and they've said that that was fine. But I think you have to think about if you're coding, you know, we put work into this with the accessibility checker, the same sort of things that you do on the front end, right? So not having ambiguous links as much as possible, using tables only where appropriate, no empty buttons, or making sure they're actually buttons. So I think, you know, anytime you're building a plugin that has settings, you need to make sure you're following the same HTML semantics that you talked about. So Joe is asking, do you have any plans to submit this to the WordPress plugin repository? So I'll start with that question and then I'll follow up with some other questions he had.
Right now, I do not. I thought that maybe I would, but I'd have to take all of those ACF blocks and write custom blocks for them, so that you wouldn't have to have ACF Pro. At least that's how I would want it to work, is without that.
Mm-hmm. So do you know, or can you talk a little bit about the approval process for submitting things to WordPress.org, and will accessibility features make the approval easier or quicker? Oh, do you want to stop sharing? Someone asked if they could do that so they can get a larger view of the site of our interpreters.
There we go. So I don't know this as a fact, but I don't think that there is any kind of accessibility review by the plugin team. At least, so I don't think that would be a consideration for approval or disapproval. I could be wrong, but I don't think that accessibility is part of that approval process at all. On the theme side of things, I think it is, but I don't think so on the plugin side of things.
So my understanding of the plugin review process is that they mostly, I think, have like some automated scans that they run, and they look for some really specific things, like if you're using prefixes that are unique enough. So I don't even think you can have 2 characters anymore for a prefix. And they look for like some security issues. They look for trademark violations. I'm not certain if they actually activate the plugins and try them though.
Yeah, I don't know. I know they do review all of the code in there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So like the name spacing that's in the plugin, I've what will help with that. So if you do like a 2-letter prefix, you're going to get a response that says use name spacing or a longer prefix. And then the other main thing is anytime you're outputting data from the database, you have to escape that data. So you'll see in the plugin there's escape _HTML or escape attributes, which are escaping information that's coming from the database, which prevents people from, it prevents people from adding malicious code, which you really don't need to worry about that much if you already have to log in to enter information, but it is just another layer of safety. So, I mean, most people who are going to be posting onto your website as an admin are not going to inject JavaScript to delete your database or anything. You would hope. Because they could just delete it because they're already logged in.
I will say it's kind of interesting on a, I don't know, just from like a standpoint of someone who cares about accessibility, and we've talked about this a lot, you know, when we think about, we want to make it easier for people who know nothing about accessibility to build accessible websites. It would be great if there were accessibility audits on plugins and all themes, because there's only an optional accessibility audit if you want to be able to get the accessibility ready tag on your theme, and then you can apply to get that audit. Otherwise, there is no accessibility audit on themes, and there's no accessibility audit on plugins, which means that the average user who has never heard of accessibility will install things and not even know what's going on. But I had a conversation about this on Twitter with someone just last week, following the whole accessibility case or situation with iBobs and the lawsuit that got settled. And the problem is that all of the review teams are volunteer. And I mean, who even knows? Like a lot of those review teams probably don't even know about accessibility. And then even beyond that, it's an accessibility audit is a much more thorough audit than what happens, which is why I think they say that if you request one for your theme, it can be really delayed and it can take a long time because they only have so many people who are qualified to do it. So that would be such a major shift in the plugin directory to mandate.
Financially, I don't see how WordPress could support running those audits since they would have to be manual. Because any kind of automate, I mean, they could add something that would be automated, but that's only going to catch a certain percentage of those actual issues.
I mean, a small percentage would be better than nothing, right? If things were more accessible.
True, but then like, are you going to put some kind of label on it and then use that as like, this is accessible?
Yeah, but it's not
necessarily.
necessarily.
It's not really, yeah.
Yeah, I think the other problem with that too is, right, is it just when the plugin first gets introduced, or is it every single update? Right, like just because there wasn't an empty button at the beginning doesn't mean that the developer doesn't add one later on, which is a challenge. So can you speak at all to, so right now at Delicious Brains, you guys are a plugin company. Do you talk about, or can you speak at all about like how accessibility factors into any decisions there? Or am I putting you on the spot and you can't really answer that question?
Well, you're putting me on the spot sort of, but I would say that like, I am like, I would be considered the advocate for that at this point. So I'm advocating for those things. I only work on one of the plugins, so we're working to improve it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing, right? Is how do we get more companies to make it a priority? And I would love to hear if anybody has any thoughts about this, and you wanted to chime in. Let's see, I'm also looking at some of the questions. I think Brian said, is there a way to tell whether a WordPress plugin has been well coded for accessibility? How would you test for that?
I would give, so here's two answers. One answer is use accessibility checker plugin.
I did not pay Phil for that.
The other set of like the other tools that you could use would probably be the Axe web tools would be good ones to use. I have a Chrome extension that is called Accessibility Insights for Web that I'll put the link for that in the chat. So that runs the Axe web tools. And you can run that, so you can run that in your browser. So you could run that on a local site. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a live website. Like a lot of the checkers, you have to have it on a website that is going to check it. So this is in your browser. I like that one because it it's really easy to get to like turn on and to use, because it just sits as a web extension, a Chrome extension. So you just turn it on and you can run the test right there. And that is going to give you like real fast answers to like, there are missing labels, or these buttons are, are empty, and that the color contrast is poor. I think it actually has a setting that's called like fast pass, where it runs through those like tests very, very quickly. And it will also give you a list of things to check, like manually check these things. I also use the Lighthouse extension in the Chrome DevTools sometimes, which it's very similar to what you get with the Axe web tools there.
Mhm. Yeah, we'll frequently test like the demos if it's a plugin that has a demo. But the thing that's hard about that, I think, with testing the demos is that you have to be able to know what are problems that exist in the theme that weren't actually added by the plugin, because a lot of times the demo site has problems on it. So that it kind of requires knowing a little bit, but. Well, we are getting close to time. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts about plugin development and accessibility while we have Phil here to answer them? While we're waiting to see if anyone does, do you want to let everyone know how they can get in touch with you if they think of something later, or where they can follow you or find out more?
Sure. So on Twitter, it's at Phil_Webbs. Isn't it convenient that my last name, if you stop after 4 letters, just spells Webbs? It's like I was born for this. Or if you want to send me an email, you can email me at phil@deliciousbrains.com.
Awesome.
Hey, thanks for what I heard, guys. I'm sorry I was late. Just a question about, I noticed this is being recorded. Is this going up anywhere so I can watch back later?
Yes, it usually takes a few days. So it might not be by the end of the week, but it'll definitely be next week. We will have it up on our website, so equalizedigital.com, on our blog, equalizedigital.com. We do post a link on the meetup event and in the Facebook group. And it takes a little while because we correct the transcript and make sure that we have correct captions, and then a correct transcript will be available as well. So
great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thank you.
So today, I was working on a new feature for MigrateDB Pro that has it has a version of what's on the site that you are migrating from and the version of the site that you're going to, and comparing those two versions of either a theme or a plugin. And it has a little arrow that indicates if the version's the same, if the version is higher or lower. And I think when you have accessibility in mind, you always need to be thinking about that during the entire process. So I've started changing over so that I'm coding the accessible part first. So make it accessible and then like take that away. So like start with the screen reader text and then get rid of that and then put the icon there. So like, does it work before I mess it up, basically? Before we mess with accessibility, does it work? I think that's like a better way to go about it. Start with accessibility and then go to the design from that.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. Like, and maybe that's one thing. I don't know how many plugin developers have designers on their team or actually start with designs, especially for the back end of their plugin and not the front end, right? And which the one you just talked about, it's all back end, right? It doesn't.
Yeah, it's a 100% back end plugin.
Mm-hmm. And so it's like, and I don't know, if you guys had designs that created designs and you have to go create this thing and you have a design to look at, but I think that would apply the same way that we talk about with websites, which is it is way easier if accessibility starts earlier in the process. So if you have designs, your plugin designer should be thinking about accessibility. And if you don't have designs, but they're saying we need to add an arrow, right? So I like what you said, you output the screen reader text first, higher, lower version number or whatever, right? And then you go find the icon to make it pretty. So, and I think too, like even thinking about that, right? You could have chosen an icon. You could have chosen an icon, which is just a dot, and said, I'm going to make it green or red. But that would cause a problem for somebody if they can't see red, green, if they can't distinguish between the two. So then you have to make the decision, right, to have an arrow up or down versus just having a dot that changes color.
Yeah, and the good thing is the designer that we do have on our team he's open to these discussions, you know, so it has to be a conversation. So you need to have someone who's advocating for this, whether it is, you know, if you have the advantage of being on a team, if someone's not advocating for it, it's going to get left out.
Yeah. Well, you guys may have heard in my background a little bit. I have a little person who is not very happy right now. And we are about at time. So thank you so much, Phil. I really appreciate this. And it was nice to have a more developer code focused talk. So we will be, as a reminder, we'll be putting up the recording and everything soon. We'll announce that in the Facebook group and also on the Meetup event page. A quick shout out again to join our newsletter, which is equalizedigital.com/focus-state. And that will get you also upcoming events and news and things, because the Meetup emails are not especially accessible, as I found out last week. And please do, if you get a chance, to send a Twitter shout out to our sponsors. We very much appreciate that. To thank them, they were, we posted them earlier and we'll message about them again. So feel free to say thank you to them. So thank you to our captioner and our interpreters, and I hope everyone has a really great evening. Thanks, Phil.